Hey guys, welcome to, well, it's not this week's edition because we haven't been doing necessarily an edition, Essie and Scrappy, that sort of thing. But I've got Coach Arick Shankles with me. Coach, we're talking Alabama state duels. Man, first and foremost, let's talk about the season up to this point and how awesome it's been, just kind of the wrestling that's happened.
Yeah, so far, I think in all classifications we've seen, some really good wrestling. I think the level of Alabama wrestling has definitely been increasing over the past couple years as we're trying to catch up to some of these other states. And our top end just keeps getting better. And I think within each classification, as we're kind of going to look at here, we have some just good wrestlers and some good teams. I mean, overall, the depth is kind of starting to catch up slowly but surely. And just some awesome wrestling. I think some of these classifications are kind of up for grabs this year.
Yeah, and it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun to talk about it and break this down, just so everybody has kind of a context of kind of what we're talking about. We're gonna talk about state duels, and if you're not as familiar with the state of Alabama, I'm first we're glad you're here. If you're not familiar with the state of Alabama, but a little bit of background: 7A and 5A have 8 teams. 6A and 1A, 4A, or 4A, however you think about it, has 16 teams. Those teams will wrestle two matches this coming weekend, whereas the 7A and 5A team will wrestle one. And we're tentatively going to jump back on in another week and break down kind of what happened and look towards the semifinals and the finals and all the classifications. But before we get to all of this, and it's going to be a great conversation. I can't wait to talk about all the different kind of matchups and everything else. For the people who don't know Arick Shankles, I mean, I mentioned your name when we were doing the top 25 for the last 25 years. Um, People who don't know your background and your relationship, obviously in Alabama and everything else.
Yeah, so I grew up in Alabama. I wrestled in Alabama my whole life, back when they had SYWO and AAU wrestling and kind of wrestled everywhere. And then I ended up winning 4 state titles, two for Scottsboro and two for Muscle Shoals, before going up and wrestling Division 1 at Edinboro, where I was kind of a backup for 3, 4 years. And my last year, I was able to kind of be in and out of the lineup. So that's kind of my background. Not the best career overall, but I definitely had some good moments.
No, I think it was pretty good, pretty good. I mean, obviously you wrestled D1, at Edinburgh for people who don't know, up in the northeast part of the country, and I see you sporting your shirt, your
That's
sweatshirt.
it. Yeah, we won today. Edinburgh beat Clarion for the first time in a long time. I think we're 7-2 in duels this year. So Matt Hill's doing a great job.
That's awesome. Was Tim Flynn the coach?
He was, yeah. Tim Flynn was my coach for the first 3 years. And then he left West Virginia where he's still at. And then Matt Hill came in afterwards.
So I don't know Coach Flynn super well. I've had a couple
Mhm.
of interactions with him, but he just seems like the best person in the world.
Oh man, I mean Cliff Moore, Mitchell Port, they were all my coaches. They run a good program. I mean, as you can see, West Virginia is just doing great. I know they just had an injury to one of their better guys, but just a
Yeah.
great program, and they're just yeah good people, and they get all the recruits from around there, and um, yeah, I've been fortunate enough to be surrounded by a bunch of like really talented wrestlers. My teams up in Edinburgh were fantastic. My AD was Bruce Baumgartner, so just my whole life has
Not
really
not too
been
not too
surrounded,
shabby right
yeah,
there.
with some good wrestlers. So
Well, you obviously have deep roots within the state of Alabama. I mean, going away but then coming back, Muscle Shoals during that time was a really good program. Scottsboro has not only been a good program during your time, but is still an absolutely great program. Um, and we're going to get into talking about a little bit about Scottsboro here in some of the conversation, but um, you really have had the opportunity to watch Alabama grow for a long period of time now.
oh yeah, like when I was in high school, there weren't many. I think I can count on one hand the amount of Division 1 athletes that wrestling was producing. And now it's just completely drastic. It is hard to compare. Like, you guys did that show 25 or whatever, but Yeah, it's just hard to compare eras because the opportunities were so different back then. Like I was having to travel 2 hours every weekend for practice partners and and I know Brandon Womack was traveling, and so it's hard it was way different now, and I think wrestling has grown to a point in Alabama where no matter where you're at in the state, there's opportunities for you to continue wrestling and through college, and if you dedicate enough time to it, you can be really successful.
Yeah, well, we're going to see a little bit of that, I think, in this conversation as we start talking about some of these teams and some of these kids. Um, back in the day, it was this team and they kind of dominated, or these kids and they kind of dominate. And we still have dominant kids and dominant programs, but we've got a lot of we've got some classes that it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, kind of see how these teams match up with one another, how it plays out, and everything else. And if you think back to last year, we have Huntsville, right? We had Mountain Brook make a run for a second state title, dual state title.
Hmm.
You had Scottsboro, who we've already talked about, and Weaver, who is always, I mean, seems like they've always been one of the top programs in the small schools and everything else.
Hmm.
Those are your defending champs. Will we see all those back on the top of the podium, or are we going to see some new faces, you think? And
I
I don't
think
want you
we'll
to give anything away here. I just want you to just kind of
Yeah.
tease us a little
And
bit.
I think we'll see some new faces, and well, at least I think there's a definite chance that we'll see some new faces. I do think that all four of those teams have a chance to repeat. It will be tough though. The fields are kind of closing, I think. And you see this in sports a lot. Like it's hard to hold the dynasty together for so long. And so teams are going to be swapping in and out. We'll see, but I'm excited to talk about it.
All right, man. Well, let's jump in to the small schools, the 1A, 4A group. Um, So the bracket has been laid out. We are missing a little bit of a piece in one of the quarters, but we'll get to that in a minute. We're not gonna. I think we have an idea, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's start in the top quarter of the bracket. You've got Asheville, who was the Region 5 champions. Weaver, who's the Region 6 runners up. They share the quarters with Piedmont, this Region 6 runner up, and West End, who, I'm sorry, West End was the
Is
champions?
a Weaver and Weston, I think, are wrestling each other.
Weaver versus West End. So let's start with Asheville versus Piedmont. As you look down the list of the potential matchups, and I think this is important to talk about. These are potential matchups. Coaches have the ability to kind of move some pieces around. That's what makes duels fun for me. But if this lays out, it looks like we've got, one, two, three, and then a big one, four kind of rank versus rank matchups. And we're talking ranks based upon your rankings, right?
Yeah.
So, um, tell us why you think like these are the kind of the matchups that we should kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think this is probably one of, if not the most interesting round of 16, right off the bat. I think, at 106, Owen Burns and Miles Bailey, both really solid wrestlers,
Hmm.
both young, but have had results that kind of are indicative that this could be a really interesting matchup. At 120, you have Gavin Crawford, who has dropped a couple matches here and there. Christian Melendez was a 106 last year, I believe, who's now up at 120, who's kind of on that borderline honorable mention kind of kid this year. And I think that could be another interesting matchup. But the big one that we're all looking at would be at 215. The newly number one Brady Thrash versus number two Jalen Helm. And the fact that we get to see this in the first round of the state dual playoffs is intriguing, at least for somebody who does the rankings.
Yeah, no doubt. So, if you look at it, and we're making some assumptions here because
Mhm.
not every duel will necessarily begin at 106, so it could begin in a different spot. We don't know who will weigh in and who could potentially bump around and everything. If Piedmont's leading, they may bump Helm up to because they maybe need to trade 6 points there, that
100%.
sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And they could be avoiding kids too. I mean, and this is something that you see and this comes with good coaching is you will want to bump around. They have two number ones, Asheville, at the top of their lineup, and if you're Piedmont, you have three or four guys who are ranked, and you might want to work around them, right? So and we'll see this with a bunch of teams. We're using the results from region duels, which aren't necessarily the weights that we'll see this week or the next week. As kids continue to lose weight or gain weight, or kind of look at the rankings and see where they're going to end up at. And so it will come down to coaching. I think this is a very tight matchup,
Yeah.
with about half of the kids from each lineup being ranked.
Well, if as you just take a glance at it, it looks like Asheville might be a little bit more favored on the light end of the scale. Piedmont has an opportunity to kind of maybe get some of those points back once you get to 44 and in that area. But you already mentioned Ebner and Thrash up top for Asheville. Obviously, are
Yeah. Yeah,
are
the
are
two
going to be
anchors.
yeah, two anchors and are going to be important to get some points from. So I don't want to give a kind of a prediction at this moment. Let's move to Weaver and West End, and
Mhm.
then we're going to talk a little bit about who we think we might see in the round or in the semi no quarterfinals,
Yeah,
right?
so unfortunately for Weston, in this matchup, I think they're just giving up too many forfeits. They did have just a really good region result, coming out of Region 5. But yeah, I think they matched up well within their region. I think Weaver is obviously the defending state champions. They have, I mean, well over half their lineup ranked. I think 10 guys, possibly even 11 could find their way in the rankings by the end. And yeah, they're just all just a very well-rounded team. They're like the Mountain Brook of 1 through 4A.
Hmm.
They don't know if they necessarily have a favorite, like a one really solid guy who maybe will win the whole thing this year, but they have a bunch of people that are in contention that are sitting right around that 3 and 4 range. And like I said, unfortunately for Weston, I think this might be a long duel.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, I think you hit the nail on the head with Weaver in that, you look through the lineup, Hayes, Fulmer, Dalton Fink, Gianluca Torres. Those are names that if you followed 1A, 4A in the past, you've seen them on the podium individually, and they've been part of a really important team in the past. How likely do you think we're going to see a Weaver versus Asheville rematch in that next round?
I think I'd say probably 70-30. I think Piedmont does have a chance. I mean, Piedmont will definitely want to play spoiler here. In regardless of that, I think it is likely though, because and I think that would be an excellent quarterfinal matchup. We get to see Asheville and Weaver again. Those are two teams that perennially for the last couple of years they've just been outstanding matchups.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you can go back in time. I mean, many many years now, and they seem to kind of clash with one another, and it's gonna be really interesting to see how it plays out. Do you have a pick for me of who you think we might see still alive next weekend between those four teams?
Between those four teams, I'm probably gonna have to go with Weaver. I just think that in the middle of their lineup, they're just so hard to beat. It's gonna be very tough for any team, regardless of what north or south or what region they're in, to kind of compete with Weaver. They're just, like I said, they're so solid. I would say from 126 up. I mean, it's just hammer after hammer after hammer. So.
Yep. All right, so let's move to the second quarter of the bracket where we got St. John Paul II taking on Wilson, who, I mean, look, I'm not as dialed in as you are or other people are in the state of Alabama. I pay attention to a lot of Southeast team or schools across the Southeast and everything else. But Wilson was one of the ones that I went, huh, this is a team that seems to be growing and seems to getting better and better. Um, Now St. John Paul II, still has some studs within their lineup. There's going to be some good matchups. Wilson only has, according to you, the one ranked kid with Joshua Vise,
Mhm.
um, and he could potentially match up with one of St. John Paul's second best kids.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the best kids in 1 through 4A this year, and Julian Lowe, who is just a stud. Yeah, I think St. John Paul is definitely the heavy favorite here. It will be interesting because St. John Paul usually gives up a bunch of forfeits, in their heavier weights. This year they've kind of closed that, but still some younger guys up top. And then they did have an injury to one of their returning state placers, Xavier Escorpizo, which will kind of hurt them, I think, moving forward. In the long run, I think last year they made a good run. I want to say they got top four last year in the state duels. So
Yeah.
this year they're looking to make another run out of this side. But when you lose kids in 1 through 4A, it's a lot harder to make up for than if you were a 7A team, just because you don't have the depth that some of these other teams have. So interesting matchup. Definitely happy for Wilson. They're one of the newer programs over in that West Alabama area, and like when I was in high school, they didn't have a program.
No, they
So
didn't. Right.
and now they have 30 kids, I think, on their roster. So very exciting for them. I think this is their first time in the playoffs. So
I think you're right because I mean I remember back and that's why I started this section like this because 5 years ago I think Wilson might have had like one kid who qualified or
yeah,
things
yeah,
like that. So to see them kind of continue to grow is super interesting. Well, on the other side of that quarter, you got Deschler and Westminster, and you got two ranked matchups right down low that I don't want to say might set the tone if we start down low, but it seems like getting those two wins could be super important to either one of those programs.
yeah. This lightweight matchup here, really the first four matches are going to be super important to whoever wants to come out of this round of 16. Jalen Gunn and Charlie Billings. I think those are. It's a really interesting matchup. Really, Jalen Gunn, I think, is moving all the way up from 113 or 106 last year. And Charlie Billings, I think, is moving down from 132. So I think one of them's a senior and one of them may be a freshman or sophomore. So that really interesting matchup, low. And I think that whoever wins these first four matches will probably make the push based on momentum, I would like to think. But a very interesting matchup. I think Westminster not having a full lineup might hurt them in the long
Yeah.
run. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's tough to make up 12 points, I mean, in a duel. So
it is. Yeah.
the other individuals throughout that lineup are going to have to step up and take care of business.
Yeah, for sure. No, but this is a fun matchup. For anybody that's in the North, this is two teams that have kind of been around, especially Deschler, for a very long time. And they're consistently putting out some studs. So I'm interested to see this one.
All right. So again, we've got St. John Paul II, Wilson, Deschler, and Westminster. Do you have a pick for me on who you think might get through to the next weekend?
Yeah, I think, oh man, this is tough. My gut says St. John Paul II makes it out of this quad. But Deschler is, I think, maybe the next in line. I mean, they just have a full lineup. I think it's going to be tough for St. John Paul to make up some of those points that they're missing. But for now, I'll give you JP2. Maybe I'm being biased because I like Coach Dowd, but um,
Hey, bias is okay.
yeah,
Recognize your bias and go with it. But let's go ahead and say, like in the back pocket, right? Having been to that semifinal round last year is it's got to. I mean, if I know Santee and I look down some of the names, they've been there before, so that's got to help you at least. They know what the expectation is.
yeah, I agree. If this was a tournament setting with these four teams, I would definitely pick St. John Paul II. But in a dual setting, it's tough. These matchups are going to dictate a lot, and you never know who's going to bump their kids around and what matchups they want.
Yeah,
But
or
like I said, no,
or who's going to pull off a pin
that's
when they're
it.
down and things all go sideways. You know what I
That's
mean?
it. Yeah. Yeah. We just saw that with 7A. So, Thompson
Yes, we.
Vestavia. So anything can happen.
And if you guys weren't like present, I actually was there for that match. The Thompson looked like they were rolling. They looked like they were
Yeah.
on their
Yeah.
way. The 215 was beating the 215 from Vestavia by maybe 10 points.
14
And,
to 4.
and then next thing you
Yeah.
know, boom, Vestavia gets the fall, takes it at heavyweight, and they win the duel. So
Yeah.
you never know how this is all going to play out. All right, so let's jump to the bottom quarter of the bracket, down to Cleburne County, who, man, I'll tell you what, if you're talking about 1A, 4A teams, that's a team that you just always like. They always seem to be in the mix. They're always talking. Actually, all these teams really. Dora, who's taken on Cleburne County, Oak Grove, who has got some absolute studs on their team, which we'll get to in a second, and Ranburn, who I think they were in the first ever dual finals against Moody way back in the day. So, all right. So Cleburne County, Dora, how do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, I think this is the tale of two tapes here for this one. Claiborne County, just their lightweights are fantastic. They're the fringe rank guys, but if you're top 10 in the state in any classification, you're a pretty good wrestler, right? So I definitely think they're favored in these first couple matchups, and it doesn't help that Dora did give up a forfeit. Now, obviously, that's subject to change when you actually make
Right.
it to the bracket. But if they forfeit again, giving up six, and then you're kind of favored in the first three or four matchups, that does bode well for Claiborne County. But fortunately for Dora, man, they have just four or five hammers in that top half of the lineup. All guys that we could possibly or probably see on the podium this year. So, I think in this one it will be a close duel, but I do kind of lean Dora in the first round. Almost an upset in my eyes. But I do favor Dora in this one.
That's interesting. Again, we're talking about some interesting ways that this could play out. And Mayfield is sitting there and he's such an important piece for Claiborne County, but will you try to maneuver him to get, onto one of those, ranked wrestlers, either Connor Roberts or Jackson Hart or I don't know, somebody within that lineup so that you can maybe take six and maybe steal some points in that area because yeah, if Dora's going to be tough from, 44 on up. So,
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree with you.
all right, so let's jump to Oak Grove, Ranburn. So obviously there are a couple of ranked matchups. You look down at Knox Wilson, Zayden Benfield. Those are two top five kids up top of the weight class or up top of the lineups. Olin Bryant, Curtis Daniel. But I think that you highlighted Christian Hill, Carter Driver down at 113. Why did you highlight that one as being the match?
I think Christian Hill's somebody that's on the rise. He's a younger kid. He's smaller as well. I just think it's going to be interesting to see how he matches up with one of the kind of the staples of the lightweights the past couple years, with Carter Driver. And I'm just interested to see how that match plays out. Not necessarily that it might be the best match, of the night, or maybe the closest one. I think maybe arguably you could find the next match at 120, Michael Woodman versus Hunter Hughley. That one might be more exciting. But in terms of rankings and people that I'm looking forward to seeing wrestle, I think Christian Hill could maybe swing the match in Oak Grove's favor. Not that they're not already favored, but I think that's a big matchup, both in terms of the duel and in personally the rankings. So
Yeah. Well, and you look through Oak Grove's lineup. I mean, you've got like Micah Woodman, you've got David Hill, you've got Ethan Jones a little bit further down, some real studs, but you also have a couple forfeits, at least according to, the region duels
mhm.
beforehand. So, it's tough to make up those points, even with some studs in your lineup. So they're going to need like a Christian Hill to really battle at that weight.
Yeah, and they were moving kids around too, for region duels, which is obviously normal. But it will definitely be interesting to see. I mean, Oak Grove, if you fill out a full lineup, I mean, they're one of the best, if not the best, arguably teams in 1 through 4A this year. I mean, you have David Hill, who is probably the best lightweight in Alabama. I think from 126 down, he's arguably the best lightweight.
Hmm.
And then you have other kids, like you said, Michael Woodman, Ethan Jones, even Olin Bryant and Knox Wilson, just staples of this Oak Grove team. And they're going to be tough to beat for any team. But yeah, those forfeits, as you get further along in this bracket, they're going to impact you even more.
Yeah, that makes it tough. So the question that is sitting in front of us is you got Claiborne County, you've got Dora with, you got Oak Grove and you got Ramburn. I think we're gonna have some good duels down here in this quarter. Do we have a pick for who's gonna survive and advance to the semis?
I think Oak Grove does it. I think Oak Grove returns to the semis. I think they were there last year, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe they were a quarterfinalist for sure. But yeah, I think Oak Grove is going to find a way. I think they have just too many studs in this lineup that, it would be a shame if they didn't. I mean, when you have 9 or 10 guys ranked, yeah, you're tough to beat. I do
Yeah.
think that Ranburn will definitely be on the lookout. If not this year, the next couple years, they have just a very full, solid lineup. And yeah, Dora's very good up top, but if you're getting beat, the first five weights by these Oak Grove lightweights, it's going to be hard to make up.
Well, and especially if they're putting up 30 points. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
30 points, we used to talk about when I coached many moons ago, it's a race to seven. If you can get 7 wins, now you can still lose with 7 wins because you can
Yep.
give up bonus points and everything else. But man, if I can knock down five in my first 5 matches and 5 out of my 7 wins, I'm feeling pretty good about my chances of winning that duel and moving to the next round.
100%.
All right,
100%.
so we're gonna move to the third quarter of the bracket, and this is a little bit of speculation on our part. I don't think that it's kind of crazy to think that Tallahassee will be, the. I mean, I don't know if the results have come out. I know that in the bracket it is not populated yet, um, but that is, I mean, that to me that might be the favorite in 1A4A.
Yeah, I would say that Tallahassee being the Region 2 winner is likely. Not to discredit any of their teams. I actually don't know, and I don't even want to make a prediction on who's going to be the runner-up because there's a lot of teams behind them that I think are competitive with each other. But Tallahassee is definitely the favorite this year. I've said it before in preseason, and I'll say it again. That move from 5A to 4A only helped Tallahassee. A lot of their fringe guys are now sitting in the top, 8, 7 of their weight class, and some of their maybe twos and threes are now ones. So, um, they're
Well,
they're looking very. I mean, they do look very tough to beat. I know they had a duel with Weaver already, and it was not particularly close.
I
So,
mean, Tallahassee. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, they are. I mean, Thomas Patterson, Mason Nelson, just to kick you off down low, and then you get Land Bell. Kind of in the middle of the lineup. This is a team I would love to just throw them up against anybody in any classification and watch them go.
yeah, I think they would arguably win 5A this year with how tough they are too if they had stayed. And even could compete in 6A for sure. I mean, just the amount of talent on this team as I'm looking down the names here is just phenomenal athletes, phenomenal wrestlers, and like I said, even I mean, there's only one kid on their entire lineup that is not in my rankings, and he's on the fringe. So it's one of these lineups where you just look and you're like, man, this is if they don't win this year, it will be. Yeah, it's hard to process. I know Weaver's going to give them a run, Oak Grove, and some other teams, but they're by far the favorites, and I think every result up until this point has kind of shown that.
So T.R. Miller might be up against it, right? Let's be honest. But they have some studs. You got Brody Hayes in there. He could line up against Roman McWilliams. That would be one hell of a match, I think.
Two
Um,
undefeated wrestlers.
yeah,
Yeah, that would be phenomenal. That helped me out a little bit too with fleshing out some of these rankings. But yeah, two undefeated wrestlers in the first round. I mean, that's
that would be
awesome.
pretty awesome. Yeah, no doubt. Well, and they've got, Joshua Bird and Garrison Little, a couple others that are ranked by you. Um, the truth is, I think it's an uphill climb. I mean, let's just really be honest. Um, but it'll be interesting. There are going to be some individual matchups that are just going to be fun to watch, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's what it boils down to. Some of these teams that you might not be in the race for a team dual state title this year, but you definitely can match up and toe the line with some of the best wrestlers in the weight class and get some good matches and hopefully get some good wins that'll maybe help your seeding and help your season out a little bit.
So we don't know, as you just said, not going to take a stab in the dark on who might be the runner-up from Region 2. But I do think that we should take a second and just talk about Bayside Academy. It's awesome that they're in the tournament. They've got a handful of kids who are ranked. Probably for me as I'm looking down, Brennan Yamin down at like what 90. That's a kid that I've seen over and over again over time. Um, they do have a couple forfeits throughout the lineup, so that will be a challenge if in
Hmm.
their first round match and if they happen to get to the second round match. But as a whole, Bayside Academy's got some good kids throughout the lineup.
Yeah, that's another team that's kind of been building up recently. Jonathan Benavidez is actually undefeated at 106 this year. Same with Noah Breland at 215. They just don't have necessarily the wins. I think that's a downside of being down south and not necessarily being able to travel like some of these Gulf Shores or Daphnes, where you don't really get to see some of the matchups that would give you quality wins necessarily. However, I mean, those kids are definitely should aim to seek the podium this year. You know, they'll be borderline guys, if not high up on the podium, depending on how the brackets turn out. You never really know in 1 through 4A. It's always you're throwing darts at a dartboard when it
Well,
comes
I
to
mean,
placements,
honestly, you
but
never really know in high school wrestling
yeah,
because,
yeah.
man, I'll tell you, lots can happen. And you're, I mean, let's even extend it further. I mean, college wrestling,
Oh
you
yeah.
pretty much know who you think's going to make a run, and then next thing you know, Matt Ramos knocks off a Spencer Lee, and you go, what happened
That's
there?
it.
So,
That's it.
that's one of the best parts about our sport is that, you just never know. So out of the quarter, I'm going to go ahead and put words in your mouth. I think that Tallahassee is probably going to kind of advance out of that quarter. And you at the moment see Oak Grove, Tallahassee, Weaver, and St. John Paul II as what you think will be the semifinal teams.
I think so. I think those are the my favorites. I think the only question mark would be St. John Paul. I think the other three are arguably likely to make it there. But yeah, I'm those are the ones I'm locking in. We'll see. I love it's funny when you do rankings and I know you do them too and or have done them in the past and
I
whenever you put
have.
something out, people hate it, but it's we're here for the conversations and I'm okay with being wrong every now and then, and I would love to be proven wrong. I think that a lot of kids should take, these rankings or stuff as kind of fuel and let it burn them and drive them to the next level. I think that's important.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that I think it's so important. I think you should put that chip on your shoulder and you should say, you know what, I can I'm definitely the best person in the bracket or this team that we can beat that team. I know we can. So on and so forth. So I think that
Yeah.
that's it's such a positive thing. So I want to say thank you for doing the rankings because I know exactly how
Yeah.
challenging it can be.
It's a
and
lot. It's
and
a
some of
lot.
the emails that I got in the past were a lot of fun to read.
Yeah. They
I
are
should
fun. I always like the conversations, regardless of if you agree or not. It's always fun.
All
It's
right.
always fun.
So let's jump to 6A.
Okay.
All right, because that's the other classification that has 16 in it. Let's start in the top quarter of the bracket with Gardendale, Southside Gadsden, Pell City, Mortimer Jordan. Um, so this isn't the Gardendale crew that won state titles a few years ago, but it's still a good team. This is still a tough team. Southside Gadsden, another program that has a lot of history and definitely can be in the hunt as well. How do you see Gardendale Southside playing out? And talk a little bit about that potential heavyweight matchup.
Yeah, so Gardendale versus Southside is intriguing. I think Southside is a program, obviously they're making the jump from 5 to 6A this year. They have a really good junior high middle school program right now. This is a team that's on the rise. This is a team that's going to be very good in the next few years. And they return some studs, some state qualifiers from 5A that I think will pose some questions for Gardendale. I think Gardendale is obviously the favorite. They definitely have more ranked kids, more kids that have been to the show. They obviously have the Poe brothers. DeMarcus is
Hmm.
arguably the best wrestler in Alabama right now. And I think they are the favorite, but it is interesting to see some of these matchups. In particular, like you said, the heavyweight matchup with Gage Becky and Evan McDonald. I think this could be an interesting one. Just, again, it's the 5A versus 6A kind of matchup. Two kids that are obviously state champion level, state placer level, and kids that I think we can see have an interesting match in the first round, and it'll be good for both of them.
Yeah. So for me, on an outside kind of looking in, it really feels like Southside Gadsden has to, if it starts at 6, has to get off to a really good start. That gives them the real shot to put pressure on the 57, 65, 75 upper weights of Gardendale. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, if you let Gardendale kind of get some momentum light with their lightweights. And all of those kids that are in the lightweights are kids who I've had in the rankings at some point within the last 2 years. If you let them kind of get going, it could be a very long day for Southside. But if you can steal some matches low and keep some matches close high, you never really know.
All right, so let's jump to Pell City, Mortimer Jordan. Mortimer Jordan, obviously, no Caleb Wright, no Brody Christmas, right? Um, but you still have Cruz Rainwater sitting there in the bracket or in the lineup, an absolute hammer. You know, but it's gonna depend upon a few others within Mortimer Jordan's lineup kind of stepping up as well. You highlighted 190 with Stephen McGraw and Gavin Freeze. Why that matchup?
Yeah, well, so Mortimer Jordan has played around with their lineup a lot. This is a potential matchup that we can see, not necessarily the one that I think we'll see, but I think Stephen McGraw versus whoever will be very important for Pell City. I think Pell City is actually very likely to upset Mortimer Jordan based on these matchups. I would argue that they have a very good chance. This is probably one of the closer duels that we'll see in the first round. And I'm telling people that, like you said, you touched on this is not the same Mortimer Jordan. Coach Pate does a fantastic job. They have some
Absolutely.
fantastic wrestlers. But this is a very close duel, and Pell City is another one of those teams, kind of like Southside, that they have a lot of history, and they're kind of coming back into the fray, and they have a lot of good wrestlers this year. So I'm
All
excited
right.
for this matchup.
So we've got Gardendale, Southside, Pell City, and Mortimer Jordan. You gonna give me one of the teams that will advance to the semis out of that group?
I think that Gardendale will advance. What this is to the yeah this is to the semis. Okay, yeah, I think that Gardendale will more than likely make their way out of this top section right here.
All right. Probably some tough matches, though, I would venture to guess.
Yeah, yeah, I would argue that this is going to be some interesting matches for sure.
All right. So the second quarter of the bracket features Athens, Buckhorn, Fort Payne, and Hartselle. I love watching the Hartselle crew. They just went down to Florida and won a dual, I think it was a dual tournament down there this past weekend. So that, shows that they're kind of continuing to think of the dual kind of mindset. You got Fort Payne with a handful of kids who are ranked. You got Buckhorn with a handful of kids. But I mean, let's be honest. Athens has a lot of really, really, really tough kids. Jackson Unger, Carter Campbell, Austin Campbell. A big question mark. Will we see a Will Anderson who, man, I mean, unbelievably talented Will Anderson out of Athens? I don't know. He has not wrestled this year. Am I correct?
He is not. He has certified though.
He has certified. All right. So first Athens Buckhorn matchup to watch, and then go ahead and jump to Fort Payne and Hartselle and give me the matchup to watch over there as well.
Yeah, okay. Athens and Buckhorn, I think at 113. Bryce Emery, he's a transfer. I don't exactly know where, maybe Indiana or somewhere up north for Athens this year. And then Buckhorn, Caleb Berry, returning state placer from 106. I think that's the matchup to watch. Overall, Buckhorn is very young this year still. And I think it'll be a very tough matchup. Athens, I think when I first ranked them second and predicted them to get second this year, a lot of people thought I was crazy. And as we've seen it play out, if Will Anderson does return, this team is definitely set to make a deep run with how many ones and twos that they have in this lineup. I mean, they're a tough, not only dual team, but traditional state. They will be one to look out for. And then moving on to Fort Payne and Hartselle. Fort Payne, they did lose Carter Blaylock, who was arguably one of the best lightweights in 6A this year. And I think Hartzell is definitely the favorite. The one matchup that I'm interested to see is we might get to see Parker Wilson and Garrett Willingham. Willingham did bump up to 165 at region duels, but he obviously could go back down to 57 where he's been a little more consistently this year. But that would be another interesting matchup. I think Hartzell is probably the slight favorite in that match just because they still have the Gage Roberts, the Jacob
Hmm.
Doziers, the Falcianis, and I think Quattlebaum has done a great job in his first year over there. So
I agree.
some interesting matchups there. If I had to lock in who's going to make it out, I would say Athens. I mean, Athens is just they've already wrestled Hartzell, I think, once this year. I think it was decently close, but I don't even think that. some of their better wrestlers wrestled in that one either. So
Yeah, Athens, as you look down the lineup, and again, you don't have to be super aware of the state of 6A or 5A or whatever you just know. I mean, Will Anderson, a Fargo All-American. I mean, Jackson Unger. There are names throughout that lineup that because they're just that talented of a group of kids. Now, this is one of the things that I love about duels, man, and that is it takes 14. It's you can have three studs, but if those three studs, they can't carry a team to a title. So talk just real quick, not Athens specifically, but why these other individuals are so important to a team success.
it's vital to a team success. If you're going to win a state title at all, you need 14, whether it's the duels or the traditional, but definitely in the duels because the difference between, let's say, Thompson Vestavia could be bonus points. It could
Mhm.
be this is your 14th best guy, but if he didn't get pinned and he just got decision, that could make the difference in your entire playoffs. So it's super important that you have every single person, and that's what kind of makes 1 through 4A a little more interesting, I guess, in some aspects because they have a lot more forfeits or tend to have more forfeits. So yeah, it's super vital. I mean, I've been a part of a state championship team and a state runner-up team, and in both certain circumstances, we put 7 people in the finals. And so the difference was that Arab had 14. So I
Right.
mean, and that's the difference. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how some of these deeper teams match up, especially again looking at Athens. I mean, how they match up against anybody in the state.
Yeah.
They're tough.
They are. They are. All right. So let's jump to the third quarter of the bracket. This is actually a really fun one for me. So Gulf Shores, Pike Road, Wetumpka, Saraland. Saraland obviously kind of rising through the ranks, getting better and better. Wetumpka, this isn't necessarily the Wetumpka of, Chad Strickland and, Noah Smith and that sort of thing, but still a solid group of individuals. Pike Road, obviously, you still have Myers Duncan in the lineup. You've got Cody Kirk in the lineup. Again, some super, super good kids in that group. But it might be Gulf Shores, who from 1 to 14, as we were just talking about, has kind of built themselves into being a solid program from top to bottom. So, talk a little bit about Gulf Shores versus Pike Road.
Yeah, this is probably the best matchup in the first round, arguably. You could maybe say Gardendale and Southside, but I think in particular this is an interesting matchup. I think you have the most ranked guys competing. I know that I have a forfeit written down here. I don't think that Pike Road will forfeit if they can help it.
Right.
And I mean, pretty much almost every weight class you'll have one ranked guy, at least in most weight classes, and there could be some moving around, but some interesting matchups for sure. I mean. You have Hayden Cook versus Luke Dickinson right there. I think
Hmm.
Dickinson was a semifinalist, I think, last year. I don't know if he's had the season he's necessarily wanted this year. Hayden Cook, another state placer from 5A. So it will definitely be interesting to see how Gulf Shores, moving from 5A to 6A this year, how their team kind of stacks up in a dual setting as they were, I mean, always making the finals pretty much when they were in 5A. So they have some, Landon Everett, state champ versus Ethan Holloway. That's another just excellent matchup right there. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, I don't even know how to make a prediction on this one, to be honest. This is tough.
Well, maybe you'll sidestep that in a second. Maybe you won't. You know, how important is it? I mean, and again, I know I'm going to say how important it is, and you're going to say it's incredibly important, and it is. But you match up with a Myers Duncan, or you match up with a Cody Kirk, and you're on the other side. The ability for that kid to go out there and just simply battle, right? Not give up six. Even sometimes the difference between getting teched and getting pinned. I know from a parent's perspective who doesn't necessarily understand the sport nearly as well, it looks like you're getting killed and you really are getting beat on. But that 1 point has proven in the past. I mean, just look at Mountain Brook and Homewood. Last year in the second round of their 6A, they're in the bracket. It came down to a single point. Fighting off your back and being able to save your team a point could end up being huge, especially in a duel like this, Gulf Shores versus Pike Road.
Yeah, I mean it's massive, and you see some of these ranked matchups, especially in the ranked matchups, inching out these wins over kids that maybe you're a little bit the favorite, or if you're not the favorite, closing the gap and making sure that you keep these matchups close. That way that they're not getting out of hand and scoring some bonus points. And that's where I think, Pike Road has arguably the favorite to get the most bonus points, but are they going to do that enough? Are they going to be
Right.
able to get the bonus points in some of these closer matches where they need the bonus points? So that's what makes this matchup the most interesting. And yeah, I'll take a rain check for about 5 minutes and let me think about this one
well,
because this
well, I'm gonna shift immediately to Wetumpka versus Saraland, and talking a little bit about especially that 113-pound match between Liam McKinney and Kalel. Is that how you say it?
I think it's Kalel or Kalel or
White.
yeah.
So those are two top kids. It is maybe the only rank versus rank matchup in that duel.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit I did not expect Wetumpka to beat Pike Road in a duel. Just looking at the matchups, looking at the rankings, and that's just not something you are looking at when you looked at who Pike Road was returning this year and how much of a senior team they are. So Wetumpka just completely surprised me. I think they surprised a lot of people. They've had an excellent season. Their lightweights are coming on strong. I think every week it's like I'm moving them up on the rankings. Like, man, they beat this kid, and man, they beat that kid. And so this is an interesting matchup. I do think Wetumpka is favored over Saraland. I think Saraland has a couple of studs. I still think that again the South is just it's growing, and so some of these teams they're going to need a couple more years to kind of develop and catch up to some of these other areas of the state.
All right,
But
so I'm gonna now put you a little bit on the spot in that you already mentioned Wetumpka has gotten that win earlier. Is Wetumpka the team that we see all the way into the semis?
I think Gulf Shores is gonna make the semis, and
Okay, all right.
I don't like that pick because it seems like kind of risky, I think, as far as like a prediction. But I just think Gulf Shores, they brought in um a new, the coach Stevenson from Scottsboro down there. I think they have some good coaching. I think their lightweights are great. I think their middleweights are going to be able to hold off the better kids just enough to where they can inch out a win there. And I think if they can get past Pike Road, I think they match up very well against Wetumpka. So
Well, and I think that that's important because again, matchups matter, right? Just because you beat a team by a lot in because your matchups kind of work for you, in the next duel, it doesn't mean the matchups are in necessarily in your favor. You've got to create those matchups. And good coaches, there's a Coach Blasucci down at Somerset High School in Florida told me once that he's like, a good coach is 6 points in a duel. And I think he's right in that, they if they can figure out a way to maneuver the situation to create the matchups they want, it can be a huge deal.
I agree. I mean, and a lot of this will come down to coaching. And I think, as you mentioned, like even last year with Mountain Brook and Homewood, a part of it comes down to coaching. And what matchups do you think you can maybe pull an upset in? What matchups do you think you can score bonus points in? And this is from youth level clubs all the way to college level clubs. I tend to agree with that statement. I mean, you're a huge impact as a coach, making
Yeah.
sure your kids are not only ready, but then putting them in a position to be successful.
All right. So let's jump to the bottom. You've got McAdory with some absolute studs, particularly at the top of their lineup. You've got Homewood, who I just watched compete at the Region 6 duels with some studs through the middle of their lineup. I was really impressed with the Homewood heavyweight when I watched him compete. You got Mountain Brook and you've got Brookwood. Mountain Brook, obviously the two-time defending 6A state champions. They looked every bit the part. I'm telling you what. I was super impressed with watching Mountain Brook compete, not only at the Region 6 or Region 3 duels, but also watching them compete down at the knockout. Their kids were super competitive with some of the best kids from across the country. So, um, let's start before we like heap praise upon Mountain Brook. Let's start with McAdory and Homewood, and particularly a potential matchup between Edwin Penny and Cannon Ford. Although there are several matchups within this duel that you could have highlighted.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of matchups, a lot of ranked matchups in this duel. I admittedly have probably been a little too hard on McAdory this year. They're obviously not the same team that has the multiple time state champs that were making runs for state titles of recent years.
Right.
However, they're very consistent in terms of a lot of their kids are around that 10 to 6 range. And they're a tough dual team. And I think that they pose a lot of problems for Homewood, a very good Homewood team this year, too. Still, obviously, again, not like last year's Homewood team, but returning a lot of guys that are in the top five of their weight class. And I think this is another excellent matchup when you see let's one, two, three, four, five matchups that are ranked guys. I think this is kind of a swing duel where whoever shows up to wrestle that day will win. Homewood has looked really good this year. I know they did lose to Mountain Brook pretty convincingly, but in terms of wrestling other teams, they've looked very good. However, I tend to lean McAdory with just the depth. I mean, if all your kids are around that top 10 range, it's tough to beat you in a duel.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, because you got to win. I mean, throughout the lineup. So
That's it.
moving to Mountain Brook, Brookwood. I don't. I mean, obviously Brookwood's got some studs. Justin Harbin comes to mind. You got Noah Davis in there, Jax Cooper. Um, but pulling off an upset against Mountain Brook, let's be honest, is going to be a tall task.
Yeah, and it's nothing against Brookwood. That's for any team this year. I mean, when you return as many state finalists as you do and state placers as with Mountain Brook, it's just tough to beat a team like that. And not only that, I don't even think Mountain Brook has necessarily had their full lineup in their lineup yet, and that's kind of scary if you're a 6A team this year because they are so consistently good. They have so many kids within the top four of their weight class. It's going to be very tough for any team to beat them. I think they would be competitive in 7A this year with how stacked
I
their lineup
agree.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just they're a very very good team.
All right.
And
All
yeah.
right. So let's. I don't want to again. I don't want to put words in your mouth like I did the last time. But I'm going to because that's just the way I'm rolling here. And that Mountain Brook has got to be the team to beat in the quarter, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think not. I don't even know necessarily how close it will be. I think we might see a couple upsets, but they're a tough team to beat.
All right. So for our quarters, you've got Gardendale, Athens, or I'm sorry, for our semis, Gardendale, Athens, Gulf Shores, and Mountain Brook.
That's
Am I
right.
right? All right.
I might be eating my words on that one, but yeah, that's
You know what,
right.
everybody? Go ahead and you can drop a comment down below. Remember, I'm just facilitating the conversation. You want to go ahead and throw some, some
Just
shade. No, I'm
yeah,
kidding.
just just tag me in it. That way I know who's talking.
All right, so let's jump to 5A and let's look at the quarters. A little bit different in that there's only there's only 8 teams, so there's not 2 matches for these teams coming up this weekend in both 5A and 7A. Um, Sometimes getting that first match out of the way before a tough second match is sometimes good for a team. None of these teams have that opportunity. So let's touch on the top half of the bracket with Scottsboro, Moody, Springville, and Hayden. And again, if we look through the lineups, there's a lot of ranked kids, lots of really good matchups. Um, we could look at 26 with Stone Staten and Landon Shin, both top ranked. You could look at 150, but you have highlighted down there at 190 Jacob Anderson and Keelan Jackson.
Yeah, I think this is the closest match per se. I mean, with 150, you have a returning state champ. With 126, you have a returning state champ.
Yeah,
So the kids are ranked, but I just don't know how close those matches will necessarily be. But with 190, you actually might have a very entertaining match. Jacob Anderson a little inconsistent. I think he's a senior this year, but he was a state qualifier, if I remember correctly, last year, part of that state championship team, and somebody who I think can make an impact. I think if you're Moody, if you're Keelan Jackson, this is one that you might want to take off of one of the top ranked kids and kind of solidify your ranking there. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but overall, I mean,
But
Scottsboro.
Moody's fighting uphill in this battle.
Yeah, they definitely are. Scottsboro has, five or six number one ranked guys, a couple others that are two threes. I mean, they just return a very solid lineup this year. Kind of scary that they're still kind of young, arguably, in a couple of in their lightweights. So,
Yeah, they are.
it's going to be very interesting for the next couple of years until that maybe we see the reclassification again, how Scottsboro competes. But right now, I think that they're kind of above and beyond in 5A.
Well, I mean, they have several of the. I mean, if we were to rank a pound for pound top 10 kids, regardless of classification, I mean, again, I'm not in the know necessarily, like in the state, but I mean, John Stewart is one of my best, 138s, 144s in the Southeast, amongst some of the best in the country. I mean, that's how talented he is.
Yeah, he is fantastic. I've had the chance a couple years back to kind of roll around with him, and he is just phenomenal. I mean, even
Yeah,
when he was in middle school, he was phenomenal, and somebody who I think will have the chance to go down as one of the best wrestlers in Alabama history if he continues with his trajectory.
I agree.
He is fantastic.
All right, so Scottsboro will be one of your semifinalists. At the top half, you've got Springville and Hayden. A much more interesting duel, I think. Something that could be kind of really competitive. And I love that 215-pound matchup that you highlighted.
Yeah, no, Springfield and Hayden is a very close duel. Springfield, another team that kind of flies under the radar, even for 5A, but they consistently have kids ranked in the top 10. And I think this matchup will be interesting. You have, I could have highlighted 106 as well,
Yep.
with number four and number five there. I do think Hayden is the favorite overall. I think they're the number two team in 5A this year, pretty convincingly. But I do think, like you said, that 215 match, Landon McKendry and Colton Mate or Moat.
Yeah.
Yeah, then I think both of those guys will put on a show here, and I think that could be a swing match. I mean, if you're Springville, if you can take 106, if you can take 215, you can win some of these middleweights right here, then you're looking at a potential upset over Hayden. I think, it will come down to some coaching and maybe some maneuvering, but to try to avoid some of these studs that Hayden has. But
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is Hayden, with Christopher Mail and Harley Briscoe in there and Hudson Best, they're gonna be tasked with kind of setting the tone for Hayden. I think.
yeah, I mean, Hayden overall, I mean, they're a very good team. They have a lot of depth too. It's one of those teams that, even back when I was wrestling, they're always tough matches,
Hmm.
always tough kids. And they're always going to have some kids that are around the best in their classification. So, interested. I think this is the best matchup that we'll see in 5A in the first round for sure.
All right, but you're taking Hayden to punch
I
their
am,
ticket to the semis?
I am, yeah, I am taking Hayden.
All right, we move down to the bottom side of the bracket with Elmore County and Alberta. I'd love to see Alberta kind of in the mix. It's a program like we mentioned previously with Wilson or some of the others that if you look back at the history of the state, Alberta is not. I don't know if they've been around. I don't know how long the program has been around, but it's not a Scottsboro or some of the other programs that you kind of gotten to know. Elmore County has some studs, Casey Crumpton, Strand Webb, Tyler Payton. If you don't know Tyler Payton, I think is Tyler now a sophomore? Is that right? Or
I think he's a sophomore, junior. I know he's a returning state champ, if I remember correctly, or state runner-up.
yeah, I
Um,
just remember watching him back when he was an eighth grader, and he was a hammer back
yeah,
then.
yeah,
So,
he's very good.
all right. So, how do you see this duel playing out, and why is it 120 between Caleb Bryant and Braxton Edwards is the one that you highlighted?
I just think this is a good match. I think there's a good chance for Braxton Edwards to kind of solidify his spot against a solid Caleb Bryant from Elmore County, and continue to have a good season for them. I think that overall, there's not a whole lot of interesting matchups, to be honest, in here. I think these are pretty straightforward in terms of if I was looking at this from like a rankers perspective.
Hmm.
That I think that, there are some toss-up matches in here, but I think Elmore County, again, with that depth, a little more history behind them, a couple more kids that have been on the podium already and are pushing for the podium again, I think that they do have a little bit of an edge here against Alberta.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump down to our final duel of the quarters in 5A between Beauregard and Montevallo. An interesting duel, some interesting matchups. Certainly down low, Beauregard kind of seems like they need to get some wins down low and kind of get some momentum. But you've highlighted 150, a very talented Reese Thorne out of Beauregard, and a Joseph Stone out of Montevallo. Um, why that matchup and how do you see this one kind of playing out? I think this is going to be an interesting matchup.
Yeah, Montevallo is another team making the jump from 4A to 5A this year. It will be interesting to see how they compete because they have a pretty full lineup, and a lot of their kids, at least their 1 through 4A, were making the podium pretty consistently. Um, Beauregard is a team I think that is heavily favored down south this year in 5A. I think that they've kind of built that program up the last couple years. I mean, you have the number one ranked Brody Edwards, you have Carl
Hmm.
Bell, you have Reese Thorne, who's been a multiple time placer and state qualifier, and then now you have Parker Van Noy down low, who's ranked number one at 106. So I think that Beauregard has the edge in this one, but Montevallo, again, it'll be interesting to see how they match up because it's always fun to see these teams that change classifications and then end up either doing really good or doing poorly. To see them on this list, that means, okay, their consistency has been, pretty well kept up this year. And I think that, kids like Drew Adams and
Hmm.
Joseph Stone, I think, if you can win some of these toss-up matches, you can put yourself in a position to pull an upset over a Beauregard.
But
But I do think Beauregard will win
yeah, okay.
and they will probably win, make their way to the semis, I'd say.
Yeah. So you got Beauregard, Elmore County, up top you've got Hayden and Scottsboro. Those are your four teams that you see moving on into this in 5A.
That's it.
All right, man. So let's move to our last classification. And I mean, to be honest with you, these are teams that we've grown to kind of get to know pretty well in the state. Pretty high profile programs. Um, and we're going to start at the top. And honestly, this could have been a semifinal match. Thompson was beating Vestavia, had beaten, I think, everybody else in the region until we talked about at the very beginning with the 220 or 215 kind of coming back and getting the fall and everything else. So Huntsville are the defending champs. This is an unbelievably great duel. I mean, it's just going to be a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, this is probably the best duel in the first round, and it's not even close. I mean,
Yeah,
this is fantastic. I mean, arguably, like you said, could be a semifinals. This is arguably could be the finals matchup if they were in different sections.
that's
I
right.
mean, yeah, in my
This
individual
might be one and two in
rankings,
the state. I mean,
yeah,
honestly,
this is
right?
yeah, in my opinion, and this is again based on my rankings, they are number one and number two. And so this is a very interesting matchup. I think, both teams will treat it as if it's a state championship. And looking at some of these matchups that we could get, oh man, this is gonna be fun.
Yeah, it is. So let's talk. We're gonna focus in on 150 with Yannick Simon and Kiowa Vines. But I'm going to tell you, the matchups throughout are just super important. I mean, Thompson could get a little momentum down low. Then you got Keon Simon kind of pulling it back. I think the 126, Will Atkinson, if he's in the lineup, is going to be that could be a potentially huge matchup for Thompson. And then you got 138 and 144 being huge matchups as well. Thompson's going to need to win a few of those if they're going to get the win over the defending champs.
Yeah, and this is going to be, I mean, from top to bottom, it's fantastic. I mean, I know Thompson has battled some injuries. Will Atkinson has been in and out of the lineup. I know Kiowa Vines has battled some off-season surgeries and stuff like that. So, Obviously, still great wrestlers, still ranked very highly in the rankings, but I don't know if this is necessarily the Thompson team um, that we thought of if we pictured everybody completely healthy. But I do think that they're more than capable of upsetting Huntsville. I do think Huntsville is the favorite. I think that it's just so hard to get past Huntsville's, 120 to 157. I mean, it's
Hmm.
just very hard. Even when we dueled them, um, they didn't wrestle all of their starters necessarily in some of these weights, and so it's just so. And even then, it's still hard to get past some of these better matchups. So. It'll be interesting to see. I think that if Thompson's going to have a chance, they have to pull some upsets from 165 to 285. I mean, there's no question about it. If you do the same thing that you did against Vestavia, it's going to be a long day because Huntsville can kind of run away with it very quickly. And I think for Thompson, you're going to have to win some lightweights and you're going to have to keep some matches close that, you might not be favored in. So it'll be very interesting. I'm excited to see this matchup, but this is probably my favorite match for the whole bracket.
So who is our semifinalist?
I think Huntsville is gonna win. I mean, again, they're just so hard to beat from top to bottom. You could arguably rank every single one of their kids in the top 10. I know some of them necessarily aren't, but they're probably on the edge. And yeah, they're just very good. And even their backups are right there with them. I mean,
Yeah,
their
they are.
second
Yeah.
string team could arguably be in this bracket too. So, um, yeah, it's they'll be fun to watch. Huntsville's definitely a very solid team. And yeah, I think they're gonna get it done against Thompson, but that one's gonna be a fun one.
All right. So let's switch to Vestavia and Bob Jones, who you know pretty well. Um, and there's a lot of matchups in this duel that you could highlight. You highlighted Stone Phillips and Xander Samarga. Is that how I
Hmm.
say? Did
Yeah,
Xander
Xander, Samarja.
Samarja? Okay.
Yeah.
I also like Caden Clark. I mean, that is a talented young wrestler for Bob Jones at 144. Colin Finley down there as well. How do you see first? Why'd you pick Stone versus Xander, and then how do you see this kind of playing out?
Yeah, well, I think Vestavi's favored. I think that they're good and they match up very well against us. I'll say that. They're very good where necessarily, and they're probably going to score some bonus points where we don't really need them to score bonus points. I do think that it will be a decently close duel. But yeah, they're definitely the favorites. We would have to pull some upsets to keep it close. I know Caden has been sick, so he's kind of been in and out of the lineup. So we'll see about him, but everything else, I think that this matches up pretty well. I like our 190 matchup. It'll be interesting to see how Gideon Roll competes against Cooper Cook, and I think number one versus number five at heavyweight. But my favorite is Stone Phillips and Xander. I think that we had a good matchup last time, and the score was 12-5, but it was, a 6 point move and then kind of some near fall. So it'll be interesting to see how that matchup plays out. I think they could see each other a couple times, and this could be, hopefully, at least in as a coach, this could be a potential state finals match. So it would be interesting
Right.
to see this matchup again. I think that um, hopefully it'll go a little better in our favor than it did last time. But yeah, these are some fun matches. So
No, definitely some fun matches, and I just want to go ahead and give your 215 a shout out. Sheldon Sharp is he's a tough kid.
yeah, he's tough and he's young. I think that's one good thing. Not to brag on my guys too much, but we only
Well, I,
have
I just gave you an opportunity a little bit.
yeah, but we only have a couple of seniors starting in our lineup right now. We're just a very young team. You look at some of these other teams and they have, four, five, six, and we don't. So for us to even make it to this point, I'm very proud of our guys. I think we've battled pretty well. I think we battled Huntsville very well. I think that we could see some good movement maybe in the future with this group right here. So
All right. So let's jump to the bottom side of the bracket with Enterprise versus Fairhope, Daphne, Smith Station. Obviously, Enterprise and Smith Station, at least in the past, I think they've been the representatives from the South in the state dual finals. At least that's what I remember.
mhm.
I could be wrong. Enterprise obviously leans on their hammers, the Stiflers, Greer Hunt, those individuals. Fairhope, pretty new group. Like this is not necessarily a group that I've seen in the past. Daphne is a different story. Um, they're up against it though, against Enterprise. Enterprise is a good team.
Yeah, Fairhope is another one of those Southern programs that, again, it's going to take a couple years, like the Robertsdales, the Fairhopes, the Baysides, the Orange Beaches, all these teams that are kind of they didn't necessarily make the jump that Daphne and Gulf Shores did initially with wrestling. So they're kind of battling time, I would say, more than anything else. Enterprise was fortunate enough to kind of jump on that bandwagon quick, I think, and in terms of these Southern teams, and they've seen a couple of transfers in that have really just their program is fantastic, and you're just looking down the list of kids, you know, both Stiflers, Greer Hunt, Cody Sigmund, and I mean these kids are just fantastic. All of them should make runs for state titles this year, and yeah, they're just going to be. Fairhope is definitely fighting an uphill battle with this one because Enterprise is just very good, and not only in a dual team but in a tournament setting. I mean, there were talks I know preseason of them making a run for a state title this year, so they're a solid team.
So you highlighted 126 with Paxton Hanshaw and George Coons. Why that one?
Yeah, George Coons is somebody who I have ranked in and out of my rankings. He's kind of an honorable mention guy. I think this is probably Fairhope's best chance to kind of steal a match against a ranked opponent. Some of the other matchups are, I don't want to say lopsided, but they're heavily favored the other way around. So I think this is Fairhope's a really good chance to kind of steal one in between the Stiflers, try to avoid them, but maybe steal one here in the middle.
Yeah. All right. So let's jump down to Daphne Smith Station in what could be a really good duel.
Yeah, no, Daphne and Smith Station is very close. I think Daphne is favored. I mean, when you return, let's say 10 state qualifiers from a team, then you are definitely the favorite. And then they've added on, a couple of kids like I know Marquise Lambert at heavyweight, who's found his way into the rankings as a first year wrestler. I mean, just some really good athletes, some good wrestlers, and Smith Station, obviously Eli Sanders, number one at 113,
Hmm.
Timothy Luttrell, number two, and then a couple of ranked guys at the top. I think that unfortunately for Smith Station, they match up very poorly against Daphne because Daphne's middleweights are really where they shine.
Hmm.
And I think Smith Station is kind of top and bottom heavy in terms of their like really, really good superstars. So I would lean Daphne here. The matchup to watch, I think, for this one is 175. Levi Hoots versus Nathaniel Jarman. This is a very interesting matchup. Five and six, and I think that it could. If you're Smith Station, you definitely have to win this match. You got to win these top four matches if you want to stay in the duel.
Yeah. All right. So um, if I'm just doing a quick recap, we've got Daphne out of the bottom, Enterprise. You are taking Vestavia
I am. Yep.
and Huntsville as
Yep.
your four teams in the semifinals. And that looks like I don't know. It just seems like maybe a little bit of a rinse and repeat. Like there's teams we've seen in 7A kind of repeatedly.
Yeah, they're definitely. I mean, yeah, they're perennial teams that you're going to see. I think for the near future as well. It's kind of unfortunate in a way that 7A doesn't have 16. I know there's only 32 teams total, but
Right.
because you're leaving teams like Oak Mountain who beat Vestavia, you're leaving teams like Hewitt Trustville and Hoover and a
Yeah,
lot of these.
Hewitt Trussell, who was a semifinalist last year,
Yeah, I mean
but ends
teams that
up
are.
sitting in a tough region, and that's just the way that works.
Yeah, I mean, just the way that the regions are split up, unfortunately, you kind of see that the North is a little more stacked than the South is. Again, it's just in terms of growth and growing programs and stuff.
Hmm.
It would be interesting to see maybe a different split and kind of separate some of these teams to see more of, like you said, a diversity in the brackets. But I still think it's a very solid bracket. I mean, every team in here is deserving. I think that we'll get to see some interesting matchups. Hopefully, my guys are ready to compete.
Absolutely. I think that statement could be said of a lot of coaches this coming week. I hope we're ready. I mean, we've been working to it, trying to get ready. This is the moment. Are we going to go out there and compete or not? So that's pretty awesome. All
Yeah.
right, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate all the viewers who jumped on with us and are watching kind of us break this down. I'm such a duels fan. I mean, I'm such a fan of duels. I think they're just awesome. Back in the day when I coached in the 90s and things like that, there wasn't a dual state title. Like, and some of our really kind of fun um moments that I remember are duels against a rival school or this or that, but it wasn't for a state title. And now you have that opportunity. Duels weren't even part of it when you were wrestling
No, yeah,
in
I
Alabama.
never had the chance. I think they got introduced in like 2019. I graduated in 15. Yeah, duels are the way to go. I mean, if you want to grow wrestling, you gotta, in my opinion, even at the college level, you gotta make it like the football season, you know. This
Yeah.
duel against this duel, this duel against this duel, you know, rival teams, rival schools. That's how you grow the sport. And unfortunately for individual tournaments, I think they should take a back seat. I mean, duels are fun. That's what makes the sport fun. It builds that team camaraderie. It gives the team a purpose rather than just saying, you know, you have three studs on your team and the rest are kind of wash. And now it's like we said earlier, 14, you need all of them. And if you don't have all of them, you're probably not going to win. And so I think if you're going to grow wrestling, it starts with duels and putting an emphasis on duels. And hopefully we can see kind of a shift in the future towards more dual heavy seasons and less tournaments and more team
Well,
aspect.
I do love the fact that we now have a state dual championship. I mean,
Yes.
it's taken a long time to get to this point, but I think that it's so great. Florida now has it. Alabama now has it. Georgia's had it since 2002. I don't know what took the rest of us so long to get here,
Yeah.
um, but it's nice that it exists. And everyone, join us back in a week where you and I are going to get together, break down kind of what happened, where you were right, where you might have been wrong, and we'll look towards the semifinals and potential finals. Is that
Yeah.
cool?
That's awesome. And I hope, you know, if you're watching this, if you're a wrestler, you're a coach, man, go compete hard and prove me wrong. That's the whole point. You know, have fun, go wrestle hard, and hopefully there's some upsets we get to talk about.
All right, coach. I appreciate you taking the time, man.
Yep. Thank you.
See ya.
Peace.